If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more and become more, you are a leader. John Quincy Adams. In the vast tapestry of American history, some presidents are remembered for wars, others for reforms. Some are forgotten altogether. But one man, tucked between the revolutionary generation and the rising wave of American democracy, stood as a bridge between brilliance and burden: John Quincy Adams. He was not just the son of a president, nor merely a political figure in a shifting era. He was a linguistic prodigy, world-class diplomat, and perhaps one of the most intellectually gifted presidents America ever had. Yet, his presidency is often overlooked, his impact buried beneath louder legacies. But what if I told you, John Quincy Adams' greatest contributions came after he left the White House? Baby, the early years, a child of revolution. Born in 1767 in Braintree, Massachusetts, young John Quincy Adams was no ordinary child. At just 10 years old, he crossed the Atlantic Ocean with his father, John Adams, amidst the flames of the American Revolution. He wasn't playing with toys, he was listening to debates between world leaders, watching history unfold from the front row. He soon became fluent in French, Dutch, Latin, and Greek, and later mastered German and Russian. While other children learned to write cursive, John Quincy was writing diplomatic reports for Benjamin Franklin. Before the age of 20, he had already served as a secretary to the American minister in Russia and studied law at Harvard. The world was his classroom, and diplomacy his language. Globe showing Europe, Africa, a diplomat like no other. In an era of expanding empires and fragile republics, John Quincy Adams rose as one of the finest diplomats in U.S. history. He negotiated the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, a war that could have broken America before it matured. He then served as Secretary of State under President James Monroe, shaping the Monroe Doctrine, the foundation of U.S. foreign policy for over a century. But here's what made him different. Adams believed that America wasn't just a nation, it was an idea. And that idea, he thought, had to be defended abroad but perfected at home. He fought for internal improvements, roads, canals, national universities, and foresaw a country that connected its people not just by geography, but by education, infrastructure, and morality. Classical building, the presidency, vision without support. In 1825, John Quincy Adams became the sixth president of the United States, elected under a cloud of controversy in what became known as the corrupt bargain against Andrew Jackson. His presidency was a collision between genius and politics. He had bold ideas: a national astronomical observatory, a national university, even federal funding for arts and sciences, concepts far ahead of their time. But the political world had changed. The Jeffersonian ideal of small government was still dominant. Congress blocked many of his proposals. He refused to play political games. He didn't fire enemies or reward friends. In many ways, he governed like a philosopher, unwilling to bend, unable to sell himself. After one term, he was defeated by Andrew Jackson, the rising populist. And many thought his story had ended. But it hadn't. Cross swords, the comeback. A warrior in Congress. What makes John Quincy Adams extraordinary is what happened next. Most former presidents retire into silence. He didn't. Instead, he ran for Congress and won. And for the next 17 years, he became the moral conscience of the nation. He became the fiercest opponent of slavery in the House of Representatives. He fought against the gag rule, which prevented discussion of anti-slavery petitions, and became a hero to abolitionists, decades before Lincoln. He stood, almost alone at times, arguing with passion, intellect, and fire. Southern congressmen tried to silence him, even kill him. But he refused to back down. His speeches echoed through the chambers of power like thunder on a still day. In 1841 he argued and won the famous Amistad case before the Supreme Court, freeing a group of African captives who had mutinied against their slavers. He was 73. And he stood there like a lion who had waited his whole life to roar. By the 1840s, John Quincy Adams was in his 70s. He had every reason to rest, to retire into the dignified obscurity of former presidents. But Adams was not built for silence. He was built for battle. He took his place in the House of Representatives each day like a soldier on the front lines, not with weapons but with words. His war? Slavery. His weapon? The Constitution. For nearly a decade, Adams fought what seemed a hopeless fight against the infamous gag rule, a congressional rule that automatically tabled any petition relating to slavery without discussion. It was a silencing tactic, aimed at suppressing the growing abolitionist movement. But Adams, with the force of iron will and constitutional mastery, challenged it year after year. Southern lawmakers hated him. They tried to censure him. They plotted to expel him. He responded not with fury but with cold, unshakable reason. Each time they tried to muzzle him, he grew louder. In 1844, after 8 long years, Adams succeeded. The gag rule was repealed. It was a massive victory not just for Adams but for the cause of free speech and abolition. He wasn't just an old man fighting shadows. He was, in the words of many, the old man eloquent. Shield a statesman to the end. By 1846, Adams had become a revered elder statesman. Members of Congress, even his enemies, stood when he entered. His speeches were delivered slowly now, but they carried the weight of decades. He remained sharp, analytical, and uncompromising. He attended every session, often speaking out against territorial expansion, which he believed would expand slavery. He opposed the Mexican-American War for exactly this reason. He saw the storm coming. America was hurtling toward civil war, and he feared what that future would look like. But he also had hope. He believed the arc of American history, though crooked and painful, could bend toward freedom and justice, if people were willing to speak truth to power. Coffin a Death in the People's House. On February 21, 1848, during a heated debate on the floor of the House, John Quincy Adams collapsed from a massive stroke. He was carried into the speaker's room, his heart still beating but his voice silenced. For 2 days, members of Congress, reporters, friends, and even foes passed by in silence. On February 23, he died with the words, "This is the last of earth. I am content." He died in the very chamber he fought in, quite literally with his boots on, doing what he believed was the sacred duty of every American, to defend liberty even unto death. Scroll Legacy. The President Who Became a Prophet. John Quincy Adams never had the popularity of Jackson, the heroism of Washington, or the charisma of Jefferson. But he may have been the most principled and far-seeing of them all. He was the only former president to return to Congress and serve for 17 years. One of the first voices in power to fight slavery head-on. A diplomatic mastermind who helped secure peace and national boundaries. A scholar-statesman who valued truth over triumph, and justice over convenience. His ideas, once mocked, would eventually become reality. Public education, internal infrastructure, scientific investment, and the recognition of America's moral duty in the world. And perhaps most striking of all, he mentored a generation of anti-slavery leaders, including Abraham Lincoln, who deeply admired him. The seed that would grow, Adams and the path to Lincoln. Though John Quincy Adams passed in 1848, his ideas did not die. In fact, his moral fire was just beginning to catch spark in the hearts of a new generation. Young lawmakers, activists, and abolitionists who would soon confront America's darkest hour. One of those men was a little-known congressman from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln deeply admired Adams, not only for his eloquence, but for his unyielding moral clarity in the face of a political system that often bent with the wind. Adams had stood alone in Congress, challenging the expansion of slavery, warning against the Mexican War, and calling for a higher national purpose. Lincoln would take up that mantle, facing an even greater storm. John Quincy Adams' work helped lay the ideological foundation for the Republican Party, founded in the 1850s on an anti-slavery platform. His speeches, court arguments, and legislative fights were studied by activists like Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and others who would lead the abolitionist movement into its most urgent years. It was as if Adams had lit a torch before dying, and others had picked it up to carry it through the darkness of the Civil War. Candle honored in death, remembered in conscience. Adams' death was mourned not just by colleagues, but by ordinary Americans who had followed his fierce battles from afar. He was buried beside his father, John Adams, in Quincy, Massachusetts, where the United First Parish Church became the final resting place for one of the most remarkable father-son duos in American history. In his eulogy, a colleague in Congress said, "Greater than the presidency, he became the nation's conscience." And indeed, Adams was one of the few presidents whose post-presidency overshadowed his term in office. He transformed what it meant to be an elder statesman, not just a retired figurehead but a guardian of the Republic, a champion of moral resistance. Book scholar, patriot, prophet. The many faces of John Quincy Adams. Even now, historians struggle to define John Quincy Adams in a single phrase. He was a scholar, translating ancient texts and advocating for national academies. He was a patriot whose diplomacy shaped the nation's borders and peace treaties. He was a prophet who warned that slavery would tear the nation apart, and who lived to see his fears inch closer to reality. He may have lacked the charisma of his rivals, but he had something greater, a steel spine, an unmatched intellect, and a moral compass that never wavered. Classical building: why Adams still matters today. John Quincy Adams' story matters now more than ever. In an age of political convenience, he reminds us that principles are worth the price. In an era of quick fame and viral opinions, he shows us the value of lifelong service, learning, and humility. And in a nation still grappling with justice, unity, and power, Adams remains a model of courageous dissent, of speaking truth when it is most unpopular. He once said, "Duty is ours, results are God's." That single sentence captured the life of John Quincy Adams, a man who acted not for applause but out of duty, who believed that standing for justice was worthwhile, even if the world refused to stand with you. The echoes of an unbreakable will. In the grand halls of American memory, John Quincy Adams may not have the towering monuments of Washington, the folklore of Lincoln, or the charisma of Kennedy. But his legacy runs deeper, in the conscience of the country, in its long fight to live up to its founding ideals. Adams never wavered from the belief that the United States was more than a nation. It was a moral experiment, constantly tested by greed, power, and fear. And he believed that its greatness would not be measured by conquest or wealth, but by its adherence to liberty, justice, and truth. His courage to speak when silence was safer, to resist when others surrendered, and to fight when others grew tired, those are the hallmarks of his life. A legacy carved in conscience, not stone. Today you won't find John Quincy Adams on the dollar bill, nor does he often dominate textbooks or headlines. But look closer, his fingerprints are everywhere. In the halls of Congress, where freedom of speech is now sacred. In the moral resolve of leaders who choose principle over popularity. In the abolitionist cause that culminated in emancipation, echoing Adams' lifelong warnings. In the idea that former leaders still have a duty to the Republic, long after the cameras turn away. His vision was not always understood in his own time. But time has caught up with his vision. Classical building: final reflections. The president who refused to quit. John Quincy Adams taught us that leadership isn't about popularity, party loyalty, or even winning elections. It's about telling the truth when it's dangerous, and acting with honor when no one is watching. In a life that spanned the birth of a nation to the eve of its great reckoning, Adams stood firm. He was a child of revolution, a servant of peace, a president of vision, and a warrior of justice. He died where he belonged, in the people's house, defending the ideals that founded the Republic. His final words: "This is the last of earth. I am content," were not just a goodbye. They were a quiet triumph, the closing chapter of a life lived in duty, sacrifice, and relentless pursuit of what was right. John Quincy Adams, the sixth President of the United States, reminds us, history may not always remember those who spoke softly for what was right, but it is shaped by them.